and microservices. How do you automate agent installation so that you can shift left on your monitoring? These are all things that CA is doing. And incidentally, I just wrote a book with a couple of other folks at CA titled DevOps for Digital Leaders. We're handing out, or raffling off 5 of these books, plus some CA backpacks and other goodies in the back of the room. If you just drop your name in a bowl there, we'll hand those out at the conclusion of today's. Very glad to sponsor the food and beverages, so if you haven't availed yourself, please do. There's still a lot more left there. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Dave. Thank you.
Great. John, thank you very much. What we'll do, yeah, definitely drop your business card in the bucket in the back. We'll call that at the end of tonight's presentations. Want to quickly go through a few announcements that we have going on in the community. Some big talks. We're supposed to have a steering committee meeting today with the organizers for DevOps Days Boston 2017. We are still putting that conference together, trying to get the organizing team in place. So for those who are interested in becoming and helping out as a event organizer, please come to me. Just give me your card or whatever. I'm going to get you tied into the email chain. Because we really need to get the ball rolling on that to lock in a venue to make sure that we have another successful event. Any feedback from folks who were attendees last year and the year before, your feedback is vital for us in deciding what direction to go for decisions. But you know, like anything, right? If you only have a few data points, at the end of the day, you're just guessing. So for anyone interested, please let me know, and I'll get you involved in that. And speaking of that, we also wanted to see if there's interest in also doing container days. For those that were involved in the last 2 years, we hosted container days at the Nerd Center 2014, 2015, or 2015, 2016. We're looking to also put a program together, but we want to know, is there interest amongst the community? And who's available and willing to be involved in also being an event organizer for that. For those interested, Anastas right here, please come talk to him. He can give you information, can tell you where they are, and like what involvement and contribution you will need from a time perspective in order to make it successful. All right. So for DevOps Days Boston, come talk to me if you are interested in contributing. Container Days, Anastas will be able to answer any questions you have and get you on the list. All right. On the backboard over here, if you guys have take a quick look, it's we have jobs and anyone looking for a job. If you guys are interested, throw your name on there. We'll do a snapshot. We're going to put that on the Slack channel. And if you guys aren't on our Slack channel, I highly suggest getting involved on the Boston DevOps meetup under Overview. There's a link to our Slack channel to be able to join. It's a great community to be able to work through problems. I think today we had 2 or 3 technical issues solved through our Slack channel. When it's awesome when you have people from local companies talking about what they've done and then being able to contribute some potential solutions for you and your organization. At the touch of a button, it's a huge huge resource. So take advantage. All right. Well, the reason why you guys are all here, we want to talk about building to scale, right? That's a challenge that a lot of us are dealing with. In the beginning, it's a startup. You're more likely starts to take off, right? And you start to get users. Suddenly, you realize some of those decisions that you had to make just to keep yourself available may have been the wrong decisions. But how do you pivot from that? All right. Has been a contributor to our community for some time now. He's with a new organization, for those of you who don't know, here.com, which is a global real-time GPS mapping company. Yes, I know many of us don't know about here.com, but believe it or not, they're one of the largest consumers of AWS on the East Coast. So when he talks about infrastructure as a code and managing it, he knows what he's talking about. So without further ado, I want to introduce Jason Fuller to the stage.
I feel like I'm right. WWF. What? A laptop in the future. I thought a Mac was cool. I thought if you bought a Mac, it told me when he worked for me. Thanks for pulling together. So specifically a read better, that was in 2010. So that was 2017. So now you're putting things up in seconds. You're doing serverless architectures. You're doing things with Lambda. You're bringing things in. IoT is their next big, it's always the hot term, right? But it'll be huge. The problem is the enterprise gets in the way, as our last presenter said. They can tell GE exactly how much data is coming through an engine, but do you think the airplane manufacturers who are putting the engines, Boeing, putting the engines in, want that data to go back to the manufacturer? Of course not. Shows that they're out of compliance, shows that they're not doing what they said they would do, shows the contracts are off. So therefore, GE will void all of their warranties and would never show up to fix that engine. But an engine flying for 2 hours produces 500 terabytes of IoT data. We put up in our drive production cycles a petabyte per month, net new. So when we look at a problem, we don't look at the problem and say, how do I fix that little app, or how do I save another 100, 200, 300? We look at how do I look at $1 million, $2 million, $500 million, dollars, and try to drive that in. So, but building at scale is not linear. You have to be really smart about how your services integrate. So when you have an integration test at our size go wrong, you have $180,000 in a few hours. When you have a auto-scaling group with no ceiling set that makes perfect sense, for all of us who have ever lived in an operating world, you set controls, you set moments in time to pause the game. When you don't have that, it goes straight out the door. So I like to say if it matters in the small companies, it matters in the big companies. So we try to bring as a center of excellence down to our DevOps, down into our teams, a look at the world that says, that's your perspective. If you have trouble with buying RIs because you don't think the thing will be alive for 12 months, okay, that's all right. We figured out how to track, tag, and move RIs and charge you only for the usage. We'll buy the RI. The corporation is okay with that, right? We have 150,000 other C38 extra larges that we can let that apply to. Don't worry about your 200. Don't worry about your 10 to 1,000 on a daily movement, right? We'll take care of that. So we had to come up with ways to actually drive some of the things that we know we need to do in each account across hundreds of accounts, and then bring that into a kind of best practice sort of center of excellence. So I do feel like we're doing a lot here. We certainly drive a ton of data. This is a graph. I was asked by my fancy marketing people to remove the numbers on the left. These are hundreds of terabytes. You can imagine what this might look like. The idea that snapshots, let's just talk about that for a second. If you're a snapshot fanatic, you're going to have a graph something like this. Somebody did something right here by setting a policy. And we still ended up, this is a 2x every year, 2x, 2x, 2x. Our actual EBS usage went up 4x. So everybody wants it, everybody uses it, and at a small team, small batch level, you need to be good at your job, you need to move fast, you need to do those things, because we're innovating, we're against Google, we're against Apple, we're against the biggest, baddest guys on the West Coast. But for us, it's about then my team coming in and driving this graph into some level of maturity to say, this doesn't work. Whoever this blue guy is didn't do jack in 2016. What were you thinking, This is a good 200 terabytes of data. What are you doing, How are you handling that? So policies only work if they have teeth. Even in the enterprise, you can have regulations. And we certainly put contracts out there that say, look, you have to have 2 full regions to get over 99%. That's it. That's the rule of thumb, right? So engineering works to that standard. That's our regulator, right? But then how do you work inside of that? How do you work that into a workable model you need data. So one of the things that's really important, if you're someone in the center or someone who's there as you can, because if the users of the AWS services have data, they have the ability to say, whatever that team did was right. Let's go talk to, this team. Let's go find out what they did. And we can make that introduction. We can have that conversation. Whoever's this blue team is wrong. Whoever's in this purple team is wrong. Whoever showed up on the block in May needs to get, touched pretty hard. So, we do try to do that. I will say, AMI life cycles, for those of you who are big fans of, stop, 2 cycles back, don't let in the SSH guys, don't do that. At the enterprise level, that's great to say, but it doesn't really, I can't spend time with 1,800 people explaining an AMI policy or explaining IAM and explaining why I choose to do this. Sometimes you have to just come in and go, if I tag it that it's going to be killed, it's going to be killed unless you call me and tell me not to kill it. Like, that's just it. You have 2 weeks. It's in your CloudTrail log. Set up an alarm to monitor that, and that's that. Now the policy's in place. One area some of you might not know about because you don't do enough, or because you don't know about it because you're still doing inside sales with AWS, multi-part factor upload. It's a huge, just like EBS snapshots, huge killer to your bill. If you don't actively set policies, you can't see it, you can't go use it, it's sitting on S3, it's a failed multi-thread upload, and it just sits there charging you cash. So if you look at your bill, and like David's friend said, AWS is wicked expensive, it can be, but if you set a policy to simply say wipe that out after 3 days of of that flag status, you can't touch it. It's not like someone could argue with me that I needed that, I needed that, I needed that. Hoarding has to stop, right? Nope, kill it, right? So swipe through, kill it. Now you can do multi-policy on S3, you can do insights, you can tag objects with 10 tags each. Go tag a huge multi-data point tag that you can then concatenate and then rip it apart and use in different areas to identify areas of misuse, use infrequent access. I mean, AWS is understanding you can't keep charging your customers $5 million a month at the enterprise and expect them to hang around for long. When Google comes in and says, forget it, I don't give a crap what you use, I'll give you that for 60%. You just go use as much as you want, you're good, enterprise agreement. Or Microsoft, for that matter, who lives on EA, right? So they know that competition is there, so play them against each other. It's actually really, really exciting to watch them squirm a little bit. So that's my experience with here in AWS.
Questions?
Nick England.
Do you mind?
No, I've proven I have a
All right, Mick, right
voice.
here. I know
I
that.
wonder how his kids sleep at night.
Now, so I was interested in what you said right at the beginning about what works for small companies works for large. And I think it's important because you've obviously spent way too much of your life going in and cleaning up shit after enterprises have gone out of control with AWS. And I think that's an important lesson to pick up, that start out as you mean to go on. So implement, and certainly in the startup world where I am right now, I'm emphasizing this, as you give full freedom to developers to spin up what they want, when they want, make sure you have the controls in place to clean up after yourself. And I know you've had some lessons in this and it'd be worth talking about.
Yeah, I can talk to that a little bit more. So there's always in the DevOps meetups a good argument about, especially in the Slack channel, what tools. So I'll concentrate on that for a second. What tool do you use? Well, I use a tool. I got a hammer. My hammer has a point. My hammer's got a flat head. I mean, everybody has a different tool. Pick a few that work, but work with your team, especially in the small company space. Sit down and say, is Slack the right thing for us? And then look at what you have to retain as a company to understand, is enterprise Slack worthwhile? Or am I just going to use the free thing forever? We're about to go to Seattle and have a private, I'll be polite, a private session with AWS where we are going to hear about their next product lines, because we do this every 6 months, on the opposite of reInvent, right? But it's like a private reInvent. And one of the things that I've brought up is that I want them to talk to me about exactly what open source competitors are you scared of, and why should I worry about it at the enterprise? because there's a convergence that happens right around when AWS came out, I'd say. Rentable space. With $10, you can put up 8 hours of enough architecture to prove anything you've got in your head. If you can code it on your laptop with $10, you can rent space at AWS to go into the next startup, to pitch it to the next VC, to pitch it to your mom, to pitch it. Doesn't matter. Open source. You can go get everything you need. You know, I'm a big F Oracle, like big. Like that's big. You can do that, right? You can also plan on the broadband being widely available, right? I think every time I see a commercial, I just saw it the other night on TV, the Metro PCS, and I feel so bad for Northern Dakota because they never get the spot on the mobile map. Like what, like, but big, like you can get broadband pretty much everywhere that's a first world kind of city, right? Anywhere in Boston, you can certainly find fast enough internet to do everything you want to do, to prove that you want to do it. And so those three things alone, you know, let alone all the amazing, awesome language and framework and just code changes that we've all created, you know, Python and all of the shit you can do with Ruby Rails. I mean, you can go on and on and on about now you've got just this perfect storm going on, and in the small company, stay in the free tier. It's not more than a weekend worth of design and work to actually figure out how to live in Spot for free. Dump the instance at 58 minutes, spin up a new one. If you're good with your object-oriented, free, stateless, free AWS. You know, they give you 120 seconds to get the hell out when they decide they're going to boost it over your spot price. But as long as you dump it first, it's kind of, you know, oh, I won't say it because there are ladies in the room, but get out first. Get out. It's not that hard. So yeah, but do all those things when you're small, and when you grow up and you're making billions of dollars a year, you won't have that bottom line problem like most AWS customers who didn't grow up on the cloud, where you're building Oracle databases to do massive jobs. Now we have an addiction, right? We couldn't live as a company without AWS. So I look at it and say, a petabyte a month, that's fine. My job is to go get AWS to give me that petabyte for as much off market as possible. So I sit down with the commercial team and I go, let's go beat the hell out of them. Let's go negotiate this. Let's go do that. But then I got to come back to guys like Mick and say, hey Mick, set an IA policy for 30 days and then please delete it at 60. And if you have something that's 2 years old, I'm going to come in and delete it for you. You know, and if Mick follows the rules, then
why not delete it in 30?
Well, there you go. That's a perfect example.
So on that point, you were showing us a graph of what seemed like cloud health, right? Yeah.
This is S3, actually EBS snapshot usage in 2016.
Right. Okay. Well, it looked like cloud health.
It does.
Yeah, same
It's
thing. Yeah.
Sick, crazy addiction.
Right.
But yeah, go ahead.
But so clearly the issue hasn't been addressed with the purple guy, or with the blue guy, or with the bottom purple guy.
The new guy.
So like, what the hell takes you so long? Like the money's already spent, like right? Like it's wasted.
Yeah.
Or not. Maybe it's not wasted. Maybe it's really important stuff that they're doing.
That's true. And so when you work in a big enterprise, you have to look at the silos and you have to understand that you're not just, you can't just come in. I've a disadvantage because Mick has worked for me, so I've seen his working style firsthand. He will come in and he will torch anybody, and they will walk away with tears, you know, about whatever they thought was cool is no longer cool, and they don't want to work with us anymore. But they do work with us. This is another perfect example. There's tribes in every company, and in the enterprise it's even more so. We have 1,800 users of AWS inside of here, but we're a 7,500 person company at 170 sites. So if I didn't love my family, I probably could be on a plane every Monday and every Friday to go around fighting all these fires, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense. So what you have to do is, once you've discovered the problem, like this guy, is drive that conversation into the ground. You know, make sure that it becomes very crystal clear with that team. And you don't always have the ability, and we have over 500 accounts, so even meeting with 500 teams every week is not going to be a human feasible thing. So how am I going to handle 1,600, angry, mix? I'm not, right? But the trick is, get it into their goals, right? So this is a really good thing for those of you that work for a really big data-driven culture, is if we set a KPI that says you're going to decrease your EBS over 60 days by 80% over the next year, it works, right? It does. Their incentives are tied to it. Their money's tied to it. People all want to work on positive things. This is a positive outcome. There's a result that you can measure. It's easy, right? It's a SMART goal for all of you SMART goal crazies. But the idea is you got to set some of the stuff up. But until you show a graph like this and say to the executives, look, that's way too much money. What are we doing about it? You know, they go, oh my God, it is too much money. Let's put a task force together. Let's go figure this out. But as a team, was Mick's point, as a team, this could be your own CloudWatch data, right? You could see this in your own account.
So the way that my company is handling this, trying to tackle this exact issue, is every company has a budget, right? Essentially, because everything is tagged, and what's not tagged has been researched and tagged. And then they get a call from CFO saying like, what the hell? And that's the call that they don't want to get.
Yeah, caveman style.
So basically, they kind of have like responsibility to...
It's demotivating, in my experience, to tell a team in Q4 that your project's being canceled because the budget has been blown.
Oh, no.
No, but I'm just saying that's the extreme, right, of that
Yeah,
example.
yeah.
CFO calls up and says, should have never let that intern onto Redshift. Sorry, right? So what we tend to do is we'll look at this all the time. So the other thing that we've done is we've taken Trusted Advisor data, which I know we can all laugh and poke fun at it, but Trusted Advisor comes off an API, AWS tells you how much they think you're going to waste this month. Put that into something, Elk, Splunk, put it somewhere where you can roll it up, right? It's not enough to be in 500 accounts. I can't even log into that many accounts. I have to put it into something I can roll it up and then send that data downstream and say to the team, AWS says you're wasting $60,000. I don't care if that's right or wrong. It says $60,000. The CFO sees it, you see it, what are we doing about it?
Yep.
Now the team has to come up with a solution. You do have to become a master at outsourcing in the enterprise. I'm not talking about international here. I'm just talking about not me, right? I can show you the data. I can show you how much projected annualized waste there is. The team has to decide, is my SLA dictated by this? Let's say we have a service that this is actually running that has a 99, to BMW, our owner. I don't want to fuck my owners. I mean, that's bad. That's bad for business. So I don't want to turn off that service if this is legitimate value, but it could be waste, right? So you have to get to a point where the team can admit they have a problem or they don't, right? And then you can make a decision on how to. And it's a black and white.
Well, all right.
Split the problem in half.
Jason, thank you so much. Big round of applause for Jason. Any questions that you guys have, we'll table them for afterwards. Speaker, Stephen, is going to talk about something that is a challenge for all of us. And if you look at the backboard at the amount of people hiring and trying to build their team, he's going to talk about building a team and scaling it as you grow. All right, so get yourself in a break, and we're going to be kicking this off. Steve's going to launch in exactly 5 minutes. All right, 5 minutes. So drinks, bathrooms, take care of it, and we'll see you back here in 5 minutes. Thank you. and vision. And, so that's why we're really excited to have Stephen talk today. Can share some ideas, some thoughts, and some vision with you guys to see if you can maybe adopt some of the best practices and integrate them into your own organization on growing a team. All right, so without further ado, Stephen Vance.
Thanks, man. Now, we're going to talk about something very specific tonight. And it relates to how you cultivate people as the org pros. If you think about, a startup or something, you have 4 people in a room, and everybody's wearing multiple hats, and everybody knows sort of what everybody else's responsibility is, because everybody's responsibility is everything. And as you grow, you start to differentiate. You start to, set up these hierarchies, and you set up teams and management structure and so on. And that's sort of where a lot of the problems start to get introduced. And so we're going to talk specifically about sort of how to scale your overall structure, your sort of management structure. Now, we are talking about people management issues, right? And so, it's people, not resources. If you use the word resources to describe people, you owe me $1, and I will find some good cause to give it to. I love Esther Derby's quote here. Our thoughts shape our language, but our language also shapes our thoughts. The 0th step in creating humane workplaces is to start talking about the people, not resources. So what does a manager do? Somebody throw something out there. What do you think a manager does?
Organize
resources.
Oh, you owe me $1. So organizes. What else?
Leads.
Leads.
That's a leader.
Yep.
I know you never get asked this, Jason, but managers should be leaders.
Set strategy.
Takes care of the paperwork.
Strategy.
Empowers.
Paperwork.
Distributes.
Empower.
Prioritize. Go to meetings.
Prioritize. Okay, I'm going to stop there. There's a whole bunch of things. How many of you have been managers before or are currently managers? How many of you were explicitly told which, if any of these, were your responsibility as a manager?
No.
We have a winner. We have one.
Some of that list.
Some of that, okay. So that's really what I want to talk about. As we grow, we say, oh, you're going to be a manager. And we assume that you know exactly what that means. And that what that means relates to how you relate to your people, how you relate to the organization, and so on. But it also, whether or not you actually know what you're going to do there, depends so much on your experience, on the degree of mentorship you're given, and so on. So let's break this down. I've isolated at least 9 roles that you can attribute to the word manager. And this is not an exhaustive list, I'm sure. I would also say that this is a very high-level list. You can subdivide this a lot. Yes?
There's a basic one that's not on that list.
Oh, this isn't everything. This is just the first 9.
It's got 6 more slides.
So, but broadly speaking, and what we're really doing here is we're going to break this down so that we can be more intentional about what we really mean by that and how it relates to the people that you're managing. Basic organizational needs: hire, fire, reviews, appraisals, raises, promotions, demotions. So this is sort of the functional stuff about the business of employing people. Career guidance. Let me ask you this. How many of you have had a manager who you actually felt was a good career mentor?
Once in a lifetime, yeah.
We have a few, yeah.
It wasn't Jason, but yes.
No. It's not on my list.
I have talked to people at a VP level who say that they have never had somebody who was a mentor to them. I was just sad.
You're also probably wrong.
That may be, but the fact that they didn't recognize it was a big thing. Was a big thing.
I've got 2 in this room.
Good, good. So, but for career guidance, somebody who can help you with your career trajectory, your professional growth, and navigating the landscape and the politics of the company. Discipline mentorship. Now, I'm specifically using the word discipline here because, okay, so I come from a tech background. I was like, oh, tech mentorship. But you know what, there's a lot of people out there. This applies to everybody. There's a lot of people out there who aren't techies. Yeah, this is Boston DevOps, but still. So skills development and apprenticeship. Team leadership. Now, this is the difference between leadership and management. Management and authority are granted. Leadership is demonstrated. And but it is something that you can teach. It's something that you can learn. Some people are a little more natural at it or have a lot more early experience at it and so on. Coordination, inspiration, delivery responsibility. This is a big one right here. Oh, we'll talk about this. Doesn't show up on the screen. That's good. I have this bright green laser, but I'm colorblind, and red ones don't. I can't see them. So I make sure that it's something I could see, which is why that really shocked me. Discipline leadership. Who's showing you the ropes of the technology, in our case? Budget ownership. Somebody's got to control the purse strings. You could put this back in that first one about sort of the organizational stuff, but this goes beyond that. And then you have things like product management that seems sort of clearly different, but oftentimes isn't. You have things like program and project management, which oftentimes falls under the realm of the person who's leading the team, but maybe not. And then my favorite, honorarium for time served. Guess what? You've been here a while. We don't have a career path for you, so I'm going to make you a manager so that I can justify paying you more. It's a real thing. We're not going to consider it as a role, but it is one of the reasons that often falls under the term manager. So why do I break this down? We have all these different things here, and what we really need to do as we grow is we need to be very intentional and very explicit about what we expect our managers to do. We need to be really clear. We need to help them understand that we can't just say, you're a manager, you know what to do. So, what we can do though is we can take this information, now that we have all these different roles, we can take this and we can look at whether or not they make sense. Because that's one of the things. As you grow, let me ask you everybody a question. How many people can one person effectively project manage?
8.
Got a couple eights? Any other takes there? 5?
7 plus minus 2.
7 plus minus 2, 5. Wow, for project management? Okay. I'm surprised I'm not hearing higher numbers. What about
That's direct.
What about as sort of the career guidance, as sort of the mentor?
8.
8. I have a feeling that if you keep giving that answer, you're going to blow my point.
Always an 8.
What about delivery leadership? What about delivery responsibility? How many people can you be the delivery lead for?
8.
It depends on your infrastructure.
It depends.
It depends on your skills
Yep.
as a manager.
Depends on your skills as a manager.
Additional responsibilities, because a lot of them were listed, but some of them had asterisk like, but maybe a separate person takes care of that.
Pardon?
I would say it depends on the responsibility from the top down.
Depends on the responsibility from the top down, yeah. So for example, it's an uncomfortable boundary, but I've had experience doing sort of the corporate, this is what I need to do for the business of employing people stuff for up to 20 people, and been able to handle it reasonably, but that's when I didn't necessarily have the delivery responsibility, I wasn't trying to code, and I wasn't trying to have one-on-ones with everybody weekly.
That was 20 direct reports?
Yeah. It was uncomfortable.
Yep.
It was uncomfortable.
I bet.
But and I was doing lots of hiring and stuff like that. So and whereas if I look at the number of people that somebody should be doing career guidance with and real personal mentorship with, I would say, if you're experienced, 5, if you're not, 3. Look at the difference in those ratios. The difference in those ratios starts to point out that when you assume that a manager has all of those different roles, that as you grow, you're starting to make assumptions that don't necessarily line up, things that don't necessarily serve everybody equally. And unfortunately, the thing that frequently gets lost is the people. I'll cover the HR responsibilities and the hire and fire and the reviews and assessments and stuff. And okay, so we'll have a one-on-one every 3 months, if you're lucky. Do those kinds of ratios align with your values? Do the levels of responsibility you have for each of those roles align with the values, not just the stated values, but the actual values that you want to live by in your corporation, in your company?
Depends on the corporation. It depends on the corporation.
It does.
For IBM,
It does. But you need to look at that when you're trying to figure out whether or not these assumptions work, and you want to be intentional about this structure rather than just make huge assumptions about it. What are your aspirations? What kind of performance do you need? Does your structure support your needs and goals? Okay, so this is all nice and good, and hopefully I'm stimulating some thoughts, but let's get real with it. I was at a company where, and it's probably hard to see because of the screen, we mapped out the roles. So we have engineering manager, team lead, tech lead, scrum master, product, and PMO here. And because of the size of this, I'll just sort of walk you through some of this. If you look, engineering manager had both people manager and career guidance, but because we wanted a shallow structure, we sometimes had people supervise, with management. Nice shallow structure in a lot of ways in terms of delivery. It didn't matter because we had nice team structures that were responsible for delivery. So the manager wasn't necessarily responsible for delivery, but we had people who, even if you just looked at the numbers, they might have gotten a one-on-one once a month. And the way it really worked is between squeaky wheels and favorites, there were a few people who had regular access and other people who had, less than one every 3 months.
that's bad.
Yeah, it's bad, to echo that. You also look, and team leader has a couple areas, a couple responsible things. Well, what happens when you have multiple leaders? It may work, it may not. Sometimes you have confusion, yeah. And so, how do you solve a problem like this? Well, if you go back and you break down the roles here, it now makes it really clear when you add in some of the ratio things that A, we have the wrong ratios operating here for two different roles. And B, we have to make sure at least that this leadership thing is cooperative, not a conflict. So we specifically focused on the ratios. And we added this role called career coach. And so the way we did this is we went throughout the organization and we said, who are the people who have enough experience to be able to have some perspective in their discipline, who have some skills with people, who have the desire to help people, and who want to do this. The last one being really, really important. You don't just say, you go do this, I don't care if you want to or not. It's not a good recipe to cultivating people very well. And so we added this in, and basically this took care of the sort of career guidance, and we did it at a ratio. We made sure that everybody who was new at it had somebody who had done it before as their mentor, as their career coach, and that people who had done it before had a ratio of no worse than 5 to 1. There was one exception with 7, and it was somebody who was very experienced at it. And people who were new at it had no more than 3.
Was that their only responsibility, or is that just an additional responsibility?
It's a role. It's a role. In fact, this gets to one of the interesting things that we'll talk about, in that it essentially established a separate hierarchy. And in fact, originally we talked about even putting appraisals and stuff in this role, and it confused the hell out of HR to try to figure out who was the manager of record with that separation of responsibilities. So we ended up backing out and reducing the scope of the role and so on. But we got to this by thinking very intentionally about how we were serving people within the structure we had, with the ratios we had. And there were good reasons why we wanted a really shallow management structure. But those reasons weren't serving the people. And so we made a little tweak in order to serve the people. Now, rolling this out required a whole bunch of training, a whole bunch, we had things on what is a one-on-one, and what is a common structure of a one-on-one, and even though we're showing you a common structure, do you have to stick to it, and is it about, is it a status report? No. We had additional training planned for giving and receiving feedback for the entire organization. And a whole bunch of other soft skills. But we were planning it in a way that we could really train it. So how could you apply this in your organization? Where do you find that you have the ratios that are wrong, or a structure that doesn't align with your values, or things that aren't executing? And what's the real problem? It's usually going to be some conflict in those roles and responsibilities, whether it's somebody's overloaded with respect to part of it but not all of it, or you have multiple people serving the same thing, pulling different directions. We also had some lack of clarity between were managers responsible for delivery or not. We also, by the way, had individual people who were holding multiple roles. And so the clarity of which roles you are holding and which hat you're wearing at any given moment is really important. You don't have to cleanly separate. So somewhat to your comment earlier, Mick, the fact that we had this career coach didn't mean that we had dedicated career coaches. In fact, none of them were dedicated career coaches. We couldn't have justified that from a business economic sense.
Yep.
What we could justify was a little bit of a salary bump associated with being willing to take this. Something that was associated with performing a duty that was respected, and it was modest, extremely modest, but it was something that was, something that people felt was reasonable, that acknowledged the additional contribution they were giving, but not so much that they did it just for that. And coming back to I alluded to some of this earlier, organizational change is hard. It's funny, I had a developer, I've served in a whole bunch of different roles, from some very, very technical programming through being like lead agile coach and stuff like that. And I had, in the agile coach role, I had a very, very technically focused developer come to me and he said, why do you do this? Why do you do something that is just so non-technical? And I'm like, people are the biggest problem you will ever solve. Try and reprogram an organization and see how easy that is. And so, yeah, we had issues with HR not understanding what it meant for one person to be responsible for reviews while another person was the manager of record, especially when they wanted to figure out how to get it into this people management system that only understood one hierarchy. This goes pretty well beyond matrix management. We had problems with people. I mentioned aspired to give certain amount of training. Unfortunately, I left before this was completely rolled out. In fact, one of my last, for better or for worse, one of my last activities at the company was to start the rollout of this and try to prepare the remainder. And a lot of the training that I had prepared or was planning to deliver on related to this wasn't delivered necessarily in a timely manner or at all. Yes?
Do you know how successful it was then?
I'm touching on that a little bit. I do have some. There ended up being some long-term confusion with some people over what this role was supposed to do, why they were doing it, and so on, and fully reinforced. Or at least I'd like to think it was because it wasn't reinforced. Maybe it was just a bad idea. And the point is not really the specific experiment here. It was billed as an experiment. It was that you are consciously crafting the size, the hierarchy, the roles in a way that keeps taking care of the people in mind. Because, some people have no problem working for a big machine. Some people really rub against it. You can have big organizations that aren't big machines. Couple of blog posts and some very interesting YouTube and TED Talk videos there. I'll post the slides up to SlideShare and get it onto the discussion board. And if you want to contact me, there's my contact info. Any questions?
So awesome, right here. All right, in the back first.
Hey, you kind of glossed over earlier on something that's kind of great interest to me. The idea that technical people, in order to make more money at a certain point in, I won't say most organizations, but a lot of organizations, are forced into management. Whether or not they are necessarily bound for management, have interest in management, or will even be good manager. It's been told to me that IBM solved this problem many years ago and said, essentially, look, you can be on the technical track and make more and more money, and we're going to have managers who are good managers, and they say to the managers, look, you're going to manage people who are making more money than you. Can you speak a little bit to that concept?
I've seen a few different solutions to that. A few different, there was one place I was at where you had this idea of a team lead who, it was the entry into the management track, but it wasn't the management track. It was the point at which some people stayed there for years, but if you wanted to proceed into the management track, this is where you went. And in this particular company, you basically had to decide between the management track or the technical track. Right. They were a fairly technical company, and so you actually got more compensation the higher the technical level you were at before you transferred to the management track, which was interesting. There's another company that I've talked to that has a pretty well-crafted dual track system where they explicitly say that, for example, that architect is a director cohort. And they talk about the cohort equivalent of the technical path, and whether or not the technical people who are in that cohort actually have to manage people or not depends on their abilities in management. Yeah. But it is not a requirement for being at that level. And so this gives a lot more headroom. I was actually starting at another place, I was starting to craft a similar kind of system in order to give a rather constrained technical ladder a bit more headroom, especially given that some things had been given out a bit gratuitously at times.
I don't get why people think that people who are brilliant at technical endeavors make good managers.
Peter Principle at work.
There you go. Fair enough.
Yeah.
So, interestingly, following up on that, I remember at a DevOps Days breakout session I was at 2 years ago, there was a discussion which evolved around, it was largely enterprise. How do we get developers to accept a position in management? And I was like, well, first of all, why the hell would you want to do that? Why not just give the developers a pay raise and let them continue being good developers? But your talk's very interesting, and I'm just interested. I mean, obviously you said you left before this was fully implemented, and I'm not knocking you for that. There's plenty of reasons to leave before the project's come to its fruition. But based on what you learned from this project, is this something you would advance in a future company? Do you think the kind of model that you laid out worked, or are there things you would revise?
I would say it would depend on the company. I think that it is viable, but in the right context. I think setting up especially in this, HR doesn't necessarily have to be the people to track the structure that takes care of people in this respect. And specifically this was around, giving career guidance, career mentorship, not necessarily being the person who answers all the questions, but the person who helps you connect to the people who can give you the answers. And that's not something HR necessarily needs to track, I think, but it certainly requires the right training. I think especially the giving and receiving feedback. We do a lot in our culture of teaching people how to get along, not necessarily how to communicate and collaborate effectively. And so we actually often don't have honest and direct communication. And this kind of role will fail if you don't have that.
What else would you consider to be a critical component of this being a success in an organization? What would you consider a requirement to try and do this?
You need an organization that has the latitude to sort of accept that they're not going to track everything.
Okay.
every relationship. You need to have that sort of training and the support. Like I think the backstopping of people who hadn't done it before with the people who had, rather than saying, the people who haven't done it before can't do it until you've seen it in action, we simply said, hey, we're going to start you off light and ramp you up and give you the support you need for it. The training about, a lot of people have never had one-on-ones that weren't status reports. Yeah, I know you raise your eyebrows to that, and I say that for the benefit of the camera, but I've talked to people who are like, yeah, we have our status report, and I tell them what went on, I tell my manager what went on during the week, and then we're done.
It's not a work one.
When I first start having one-on-ones with people who report to me, I explicitly say to them, I'm like, this is not about me, this is about you. I will ask some questions, but you will start the conversation. And this is about your future, your career, your planning, your place in the organization from your point of view.
So Steve, I got one question for you. Because I think this is very relevant, especially to a lot of individuals in the room who are dealing with this. So my question to you is, for people who are feeling that the organization they're a part of and they want to stay, they believe in the mission, feel that they are on a different, on the wrong path as far as being forced into management when they know they don't want to be into it. How do you, what advice do you have for them for starting the conversation upwards to maybe change the way the company views their internal equity? And then secondly, what pitfalls have you experienced that you can communicate for them, for individuals to know that, hey, be ready to, answer these questions, A, B, C, if you have any examples?
Unfortunately, one of my first answers is going to be find somebody at a management or executive level who understands this. It entirely depends on the quality and receptiveness of your manager whether or not they'll listen to you about this. If you find somebody at a level who can talk to their peers, especially in an organization that relies on command and control, you're going to have a much more effective path to organizational change. So I would say find allies in positions of power. Even then, there may be, are they willing to spend political capital on it? Are they willing to, is it high enough priority? Do they really see the problem as you see it? Unfortunately, if you look at our industry, average tenure is less than 2.5 years. And part of that is because oftentimes companies don't do the pay raises to match the market increases, or they don't give the variety of the technical exposure for you to really have this career growth. Having that career thing, you can try, I would also say you can try to steer your manager into having a more you-centric one-on-one, or register specific agenda items that you want to talk about with respect to that to start opening some of those doors. It's a hard one to, especially in an organization that either isn't thinking about what a manager should do or is very set in its concept of what a manager should do. It's a very hard thing to change as a grassroots effort.
I've seen a lot of really good engineers turn into really lousy managers through being forced into a promotion. And I actually think the engineers themselves have to coin a phrase, grow a pair. And they have to say, look, I'm not going to take a management position. If you value my, you're obviously trying to promote me because you value my contribution. If you really value my contribution, keep me as an engineer. Give me a few bucks more, but I'm not going to go into management, and if you force me this direction, I'm going to quit. And I know Jason has opinions on this.
Nick has threatened to quit 5 times on me in my life. So, as a manager, I like to look in the mirror as Mick, and I think your presentation did a good job of saying, what do you do to help your manager? But I guess the question I have is, how much do we have to lay some accountability onto accounting and finance, HR, and I'm sorry, Dave, but recruiting to get it right? I mean, as an organization globally, you can't just continue to focus on your silo. I mean, there are things that I do really well that I get rewarded for because I have a great data-driven organization that functions outside of HR. So yeah, we still have to go through the paces and do all the BS in our HR portal to say, yeah, you met your goals. But ultimately, there's a game, there's a score, and I know how to play the game, and so I'm good at it, right? I think personally I thrive in that. Others maybe don't, but I think engineers and developers do. That's why we drive so many metrics that we do. But I mean, ultimately, I find one of the biggest challenges, I wonder if you do as well, in getting executives in the chief people person or the chief of chiefs to really lay down and say, yeah, okay, my business is X and my engineering talent's going to make it happen. And how much does Capital One, how much does here, how much does your current organization deal with this sort of HR and recruiting and finance are just not, they're not ready. They're 10 years behind.
So for this in particular, for this career coach role, I had several hours of meetings with the head of HR as well as the HR person who is responsible for our functional area. I had probably 10 times that number of hours of discussions with my boss and his boss. I had conversations with the people in finance about the compensation. I had even conversations about it with the president of the company in a fairly decent-sized company. As well as all of the managers that it was impact, because there was a certain amount of this that would take away something that they perceived as part of their responsibility and control, even if they were doing a terrible job at it. And there was at least one person who, even though he'd admit that he was doing a terrible job, didn't want to let go of it, and fought it pretty significantly. So you're right. I mean, it's a systemic thing, and sort of coming back to this question of how do we make developers managers? Well, first of all, let me touch on something that I thought of while we were doing this, which is, as managers, we can also cultivate this as well. One of the things you can really do is cultivate direct and honest communication. Cultivate an understanding that being a manager is not a cookie-cutter role. It's something that you put your own imprint on, and that as long as you satisfy certain things, that are the requirements of the organization, you have a wide degree of latitude to be an inspirer rather than a commander, to be, leading from the trenches, however you want to cast that. There's a wide variety of how that can be applied. So there's a whole bunch of things there that we can do. Even if you just teach people how to communicate directly and honestly, and that we're emotional beings, but it doesn't necessarily have to, and so we can communicate our emotions without necessarily being completely reactive to them, and therefore, say, hey, I don't like that, before it becomes an issue where you have to say, I quit. Make it so that your teams feel, the whole Google psychological safety thing, make it so that your teams feel comfortable telling you that there are problems before they become a crisis. These are the kinds of things that cultivate good leaders and people who recognize that management isn't the death of them.
All right, last question here.
Can't be from Mick.
It's not a question, it's a comment. But going back to what you were saying earlier about the one-on-ones, I think that's the one-on-ones are the most important strategic relationship between a manager and an employee. And what I always started, as a manager, what I always started my one-on-ones with is, look, what we say in this room is between us. It goes no further. This is my time to tell you what I think of you, and it doesn't go to HR. It's your time to tell you to tell beyond that. And I think it's in those environments where you can actually get a really honest opinion of where someone wants to be. So then you can talk to an engineer about, we're considering making you a team lead, we're considering giving you direct reports. What do you think?
Yeah.
And it's not taken as, we're going to do this, and now you have to make a decision on your job, but give me an honest opinion of it. So I really do think the one-on-ones are extremely important.
Yeah, and do you mind if I make one?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Finish on that, right?
Interestingly, I had an employee once who, in our one-on-ones, said to me, I want to be an engineering manager.
Exactly, yeah.
And I'm sitting here looking at him saying, I don't think you'll be a very good engineering manager. Is that really what you want? And so over the course of our one-on-ones, over the span of about 2 months, what he eventually realized is he thought being a manager was his only choice to have some level of technical role when I started grooming him to become an architect, and he ended up becoming an architect.
Nice. Awesome. So, hey, round of applause for Stephen here. Really, really good information. You know, some of the takeaways: transparency, trust, and you know, open collaboration. Right? Those are the major things that need to happen in order to be successful in managing people and moving forward as a team. Hey, so first off, I just want to thank all of you guys so much. Thank our presenters, Isotope, CA Technologies, for all of your involvement, your help in sponsoring and supporting. Thank you. Now, before we leave right now, a couple closings. I have the winners for the raffle. Andy, if you can raise your hand. I'm going to announce your name. Andy in the back there. He's going to present the winners with their bags. And also, March 15th, all right? So we're having our next meetup March 15th at Cartwright. Our topic is going to be security at DevOps speed. I'm looking for speakers who want to talk about velocity and security, all right? Obviously, Tom is jumping in from ThreatStack. But, all right, for the winners, all right?